This audio has been censored for your listening pleasure. Click the Rumble or Spotify link in the description to listen in its authentic form.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode. And today I have a very special guest. I'm super excited. And I know most of you might know of Levy. She's a journalist and I've been keeping up with her work. And she has really great insight on the culture and what's going on today in schools. And she's been outspoken in the gender diversity part of it. And without further ado, Suen, welcome.
Thank you very much.
If you can just give the viewers and the listeners a little bit of information about who you are, what you've been up to, and I also heard that you are an author.
Okay, so this is my third career. I left the Toronto Sun in 2021 after 31 years as an investigative columnist, mostly working in politics, City Hall and Queen's Park. I started off my career at the Toronto Sun, writing about education. And now I've come full circle. I joined True North 2 days after I left the Toronto Sun and haven't looked back. And I've been writing about mostly education and all the craziness that's going on in education. Some politics, but I try to stay away from that because I spent a lot of time covering that my last 30 years. Pride myself on being a digger. I don't run with the pack. And in 2016, I wrote a book called Underdog: Confessions of a Right-Wing Gay Jewish Muckraker. How's that for a title?
And that's quite a loaded title.
Yeah, the book did fairly well for a Canadian author, and it was really an autobiography of the hurdles I've had to overcome and my perspective from Toronto City Hall and what I think of politics, the good, bad, and the ugly. And who knows, I may have a second book on the horizon.
Excellent. That's good to know. So what got you in the education part? You seem like it was something that you were focusing.
Well, I started writing for True North, and I started writing about free speech and, all the crazy woke ideology that is really captured a lot of our institutions, not just education. But my expertise, of course, because I started writing about education in the 1990s, believe it or not, I don't want that to age me, but I wrote about it and the stranglehold that the teachers' unions had on education. So here we are, fast forward 30 years later, and a lot of the issues really have not changed. However, the introduction of critical race theory, which is anti-Black racism, and in universities and public schools, and gender ideology has changed. Back in the 90s, the teachers were just complaining basically about their pay and their perks, and the teachers' unions were very, very powerful. They still are, but they were more powerful back in the 90s about getting them the proper pay and perks. And of course, they were fighting the Mike Harris government back then. This is really aging me, boy. And now it's all about gender ideology. And the unions are still very much involved. They've become sort of woke to go with the times. And I found it fascinating because bullying and the lack of sound basics back in the 90s was an issue. And now it's even a bigger issue because unfortunately, the school boards are focusing far too much on all of these concepts at the peril of teaching, reading, writing, and arithmetic. I might add that when I covered education in the 90s, that's when they introduced the Ontario College of Teachers and the Education Quality and Accountability Office. I'd been writing a lot about, together with the Coalition for Education Reform back then, about the lack of standards for, measurable standards for kids in the system, as to how well they were doing in math, in reading, in literacy. And lo and behold, they established these standardized tests, which the teachers' unions, of course, have fought every step of the way. They do continue. However, the standardization of testing was supposed to improve kids' scores. In fact, they've gone down. And I think education in Ontario is at a crisis, and in Canada is in a crisis. And that's what gravitated me to be covering it.
Have these tests, the content and the quality, has it decreased, or has the education decreased, which led to lower scores, or is it a combination of both?
I think it's a combination of both. I think what's happened over the years is that teachers teach to the test. So they give the kids, the grounding they need to do as well as they can possibly do on the tests. They make provisions for ESL learners, immigrant children, which there's a huge number of in the Toronto School Board, for example. And it's become almost a joke in the way that they are administered. And the thing is that they've learned nothing, the teachers' unions, the school boards, the education ministry, from the poor performance of kids. All you have to do is compare, and we did this back in the 90s, compare their scores to the scores of kids overseas. And Canada rates, and I would venture to say probably still rates lower than many of countries overseas in Europe and certainly Asian countries. The kids are just not being taught the basics.
You're absolutely right about that. Our family comes from Romania. My family grew up in communist Romania. So we see a lot of the same, I would say, propaganda that was over there. Mm-hmm. And even during the communist times, and even now in Romania, the schools are a lot more diligent in what they teach. And they put a lot of emphasis on the academics, math, English, science, and all of this, because they still want people to be able to perform at a high level. And because that's something that they valued. And if I was to take my kids, or if anybody was to take their kids, if they have no extra school activities in which they're learning, supplementing their math or English, if I was to take them to Romania, there's no way they could keep up with the education.
So, yeah. And, my last time round, and I haven't even got to this time round, but my last time round, I wrote about the profusion of tutoring services, the gravitation of parents to the private school system, which is unaffordable to many. And what's happening now, instead of the private school system, is homeschooling, because kids are not getting grounded properly in the basics. All you have to do is go to a grocery store. And if you're not using, the instant checkout, you get a sort of somebody ringing you up who's young. And if they didn't have, when a machine breaks down, for example, they don't know how to make basic change. They don't know how to add or subtract. If you, God forbid, you should confuse them and give them something, that they have to actually calculate in their heads. It's shameful. Kids are not being grounded to perform properly in the workforce. And I used to think that they weren't being grounded properly to actually perform well in universities, but universities have become so woke that the same thing is happening in universities. So we're graduating kids who can, basically tell you that they're either oppressors or oppressed, according to critical race theory, or they have 16 pronouns. They're he, she, they, whatever. But they don't know how to add, subtract, multiply, or divide. It's shocking. And
they also don't know what a man or a woman is. Just the absolute basics of biology.
Biology, yeah.
Yeah, know, which I never thought we are going to get to this place ever. This is just insane. Yeah. But yes, I totally agree with you. I wonder if, I think this is how the equity comes into play, because it's the same thing. The promise is that everybody has equal outcome. So I do pretty competitive cycling. And if I train for a race, an equitable race would be somebody finishing with me at the same time. So in order for somebody that did not train as hard to keep up with me would be to get a boost, maybe put a motor on their bicycle or something. However, or they could have me bike with the brakes on, so they could keep up. So that's kind of how I'm seeing equity play out. And in this case, with the bicycle example, why would I train any harder for the next race if we're all getting medals at the end, right? So then that just makes me train less and less and less. And then at the end, this overall finish line qualifications to make it there is so low that you just kind of show up for a race and everybody gets a pat on the back.
That's exactly it. That is the biggest, one of the biggest downfalls of the system now is that everybody has to have a medal. Everybody has got to be, their little feelings will be hurt if they don't get a medal. Well, again, when I went through school, I wasn't, I discovered my athleticism as I went on, but I was ahead of myself, a year and a half ahead of myself, which doesn't happen now. And I had to adapt socially. And I did very well in academics, but I wasn't able to keep up in the athletic part of things. Well, I caught up eventually, and, no big whoop. It didn't affect my, way of life. I didn't whine or complain about that sort of thing. I complained about other things, but, that's the problem now. Every kid has to feel good. It's all about feelings. And because we have so many immigrant children coming through the system now, it's the latest is that, we've got to dumb down the curriculum so that everyone can perform at a standardized level. And it makes me actually want to weep, because I know when I went through school, I was a year and a half ahead of myself. I had to perform. I was in an enrichment program. I would have been so bored if they had dumbed down the curriculum and not let me achieve at my level. But I see that happening, for example, in the Toronto School Board, where gifted children are, almost discouraged. I mean, they have to find another outlet, take lessons elsewhere, leave the system. And so then we've got this dumbing down. I mean, I laugh when you gave the bike analogy, David, because I've trained for half marathons. I've given up my half marathon days, but I trained, and it was really hard for me because I don't have a runner's body, and it was hard for me, but I have incredible endurance. So I would invariably come in the bottom third, but it wasn't the fact that I didn't win the race. It was the fact that I accomplished something. And there's no sense of kids actually working to accomplish something in the school system now.
That's right. And I don't know why there is this fear of trying to become better, and at the expense of hurting feelings. I know whenever I do something, I look up to the people that are better than me. And it gives you a direction like, hey, I can achieve that. And I really don't want to be like these other people who are just kind of doing the same thing. And even in cycling, I go with the people that are better than me so I can learn from them, right? And then I'm always looking up. And then the people who are coming with me on a bike ride that are not as experienced, I'm looking to bring them up at my level, and we have fun and all that, like always teasing, like, why can't you keep up and all of this, just to like motivate people. And, but it's all, you have to be comfortable with getting better, and you also have to be comfortable with losing. Failing
and picking yourself up. And let me tell you, I just ran a 10K a couple of weeks ago. Well, actually before the new year. And I was one of the last to come in. And that's okay by me. And running right alongside of me or behind me was a young man who was probably about 150 pounds overweight. And we kept encouraging. He said, you are my motivation. I'm watching you. And I said, well, I'm a few years older than you, but I said, you keep it up. You keep it up. And I've had many of failures during my life. You pick yourself up, but kids are not, with the school system, the way the school system is operating now, kids are not being conditioned for failure, to learn that, they may not achieve on this test, they may not win this race. We're turning out, I have to tell you, a nation of crybabies, spoiled, entitled crybabies. And I blame all the woke ideology for that. Parents and teachers are doing kids no service in the current system.
They are not. They are just enabling bad behavior by just caving in. And it's interesting, like even as a parent, as my girls were growing up, I started introducing like board games, and they didn't like losing, but I let them know at the beginning that I'm going to be winning, right? Like, let's play some board game. Dad wants to win, right? Like, oh no, like, no, we're going to beat you and all that stuff, right? And at the beginning, they were upset because they didn't want to lose, but now they win the occasional game, right? 'Cause we played so much, like they're getting better and they're winning, right? So then they rub it in my face, and it's really funny, and I get a kick out of it. Like I'm happy to lose and I'm happy to see, but they've overcome that failure, that's fear of failing, and I see this as a instrumental in moving on in life, because hard situations will come up and it depends on how you're going to handle them and make the best.
Well, you see it already with kids in their 20s, and I don't want to generalize, but aimless, not motivated, they don't have a purpose, a lot of them, no idea, still living in mommy and daddy's basement. And I see the kids going through the school system who are coddled, not just by teachers, but by parents. And not only, like, I shouldn't generalize because I don't think all teachers want to do that, but they're forced by the ideology. They can't speak out, or they'll be silenced by their boards, or worse yet, disciplined. Their unions do not support them. I mean, it's a real, let's speak to teachers now. I mean, there's a cruel world for teachers now in the Canadian and Ontario system, because those who really want to do the job and really care about the job, and many do, most do, they can't, they're not allowed to speak out. They have to digest all this anti-racism and gender ideology education, which is a crap pile of BS, absolute pile of BS, time wasting. And, and when the unions complain, I don't think the unions even understand what the average teacher has to, who is committed and motivated, has to deal with from day to day to day.
I definitely don't think they understand, but I do think that they believe this ideology, because it all comes from the top down and it gets pushed. And now the parents are pushing from the bottom up against this. And specifically with gender ideology, I've had a delegation, and you've covered it as well, where I'm speaking to the school board against them asking the of my daughters, and they've been putting out surveys asking, what is your So I did the survey, and I was shocked that these questions are being asked. And the other thing was, on the surveys, they released an open letter regarding my concerns, which really they haven't addressed any concern of mine. And they didn't release the actual surveys. And what people will find on these surveys is that they say grade 4 and up. So grade 4 is also, in my opinion, not acceptable to ask for sexuality of a minor. But on the survey itself, it's age 4 and up. So not only are they not acting accordingly, but what they're actually doing is even more egregious. than what they say they're doing.
Yeah, I listened to your and I wrote about your deputation, and it was brilliant. And there is pushback now because it started with the teacher Carolyn Brzezinski a year ago, who talked about age inappropriate books that are in the school libraries, elementary school libraries, that talk about transitioning and about the homosexual. I don't want to say lifestyle because I'm gay. Thinking that you might be homosexual at the age of 8 or 7. I mean, that's ridiculous. Mm-hmm. And so when you gave your deputation, it was brilliant. I mean, because it is none of their business what your children's sexuality is. They shouldn't be asking. They have no right to know. And the only thing they did, instead of answering your questions, is try to intimidate you with an open letter. Didn't respond to you, but put out an open letter, because this is what school boards do. When cornered like a rabbit or a deer, they, bounce back with something to try and intimidate you. And instead of listening to parents' concerns, they do this nonsense. I think parents are starting to see through it. Certainly you are. And I think parents have to continue to really push back on it, because they're used to getting their way. They're used to intimidating. I mean, one thing has not changed. I used to sit through school board meetings in the 90s, and, people would get up and speak, or I'd sit there and watch, and the outrageous things that were said back then. That running for trustee is really a stepping stone for many NDPers in particular to a bigger and brighter political career. So they want to make their mark. They want to, march to the woke beat, and they'll do whatever they can to push their ideology. And what they did to you was wrong. It was absolutely a scene that they put that open letter out.
I thought it was an embarrassment on behalf of the school board, and I thought they proved my point. They were really grasping at straws in a lot of the things. And to me, as soon as I saw that, I was thinking, why would you do this to yourselves? And then they say they have this big data process of selecting library books and stuff. And I looked at it and I was like, if this is true that you have this giant process, how are these books getting through, right? One is incompetence, or two, it's deliberate. And if it's a big process, how many people are giving this book the thumbs up as it gets accepted in the school? It's a bad look. If they said we don't have a process, or we have one librarian and they're blind, and these books are
deaf
getting
and dumb. Yeah.
I'd be like, well, I could see how these books are getting through. But they chose to grandize this process and assure parents, trust us. And I'm just like, you got this process and it's still happening.
David,
Great.
Their trust us attitude has been in process ever since I started covering education. The only thing is that the outcomes are worse now, and it's more concerning because kids aren't being educated at all. They're being indoctrinated. And, the parents, I have to say that, you're an exception, and many others who have spoken are an exception, but they haven't paid attention. So when the trustee and the school board's elections roll around, nobody pays attention to who's on the ballot, I should say. Oh, that name sounds familiar. I'll vote for X or Y, or that name sounds great. You never know half the time who you're voting for. And then you end up with these people who are either trustees for life or come in with their ideology and use the board as a stepping stone to a bigger and better career. And I've seen, Kathleen Wynne started off as a school trustee. So there's, evidence of how you can work your way up. So I have to, in some ways, blame parents, not you, but other parents, for not paying attention. And then all of a sudden it reaches crisis proportions. And I think that a lot of school boards spent the pandemic dreaming up all these ideologies, putting together a curriculum that would, embrace gender ideology. They had a lot of time without the eyes of the few eyes of parents on them. And they were able to, I saw a lot of stuff coming out during the pandemic.
I think parents really need to get in this, because in a way we've allowed this to happen, because I wasn't aware of what was happening. And it's a little bit of the problem is two ways. One, we allow this to happen, but two, they're not very transparent about what is happening.
No.
So I can only work with the information that I have. And I find that even now when I talk about the policies, procedures, and practices, they're still in denial mode about what's happening. And they're still using the human rights as a justification to have sexual material and peddling race, segregation in schools. And a lot of, the language that is used, it's very positive language that they say, we're caring for the kids and we're doing all of this. But that's not the reality that I see. And that's not the reality they present. And I think parents are beginning to see through it right now. But I don't think a lot of parents didn't know what was happening. I certainly had no idea.
No, I mean, and good for you for discovering what's happening. And you're right. They use positive language. They say, trust us. We know what's best for your kids. They use, if someone would analyze the language they use, they would say, oh, this is like a really, really good propaganda campaign. Coming from Romania, how they soothe the concerns of everyone using language. We only care about kids. We only, we're only doing what's best for you, best for the kids. We care about the kids. Well, if you start dissecting what they're saying and their actions, you realize that they don't really give a crap about kids. It's all about their ideology and foisting it on kids, and parents be damned. You have no say. The most outrageous thing I think that I've run across in the school boards right now is that if child, and I say child because they are still children at 11 or 12 or 13 or 14, identifies as having, say, they're a girl and identify with male pronouns, or, think they might be, have gender dysphoria, and they change their pronouns and they dress a certain way at school, the teachers and the school don't have to tell the parents. In fact, they're not obligated, but they don't. They go out of their way not to tell parents. Well, it's like asking you what orientation your kids are. That is none of their business. And this is none of their business. It's up to parents. And they use the excuse that parents might not agree with it. Again, we get back to the whole idea of coddling a kid who may be confused, may need some, counseling or understand, or maybe they're just going through a typical teenage questioning. They may be questioning their sexuality, whatever. They may have autism, but it is not up to the school boards or the schools or the principals or the teachers to decide whether or allow kids to embrace certain pronouns, to talk about worst case scenario, surgery, transitioning drugs. That's not up to them. They're not social workers. They're teachers.
That's right. And in regards to this, so the director himself said that these kids are at risk of depression and suicide, high risk, which further tells me, if this is true, why are you not telling parents? You have a bunch of highly suicidal kids and you are not telling parents? What a bad look. Even if that was true, right? it's still not supposed to, you're not supposed to keep parents out of the loop. You're not supposed to paint parents as at risk of harm to their own kids, which is what they're doing, right? Keep them just in case you're at risk. So it's driving a wedge between parents and
divide
their
and
kids.
conquer.
Yeah. And this is written in their policy. This is written down, all of this stuff. And the other thing, you know, when Carolyn did her delegation a year ago, she spoke about 2 books, and one book was talking about a child that was discussing their with other children. And the other book was trivializing the medical procedures that a child goes through that results in stigmatization at a young age before the child even has the opportunity to process life, to see, do I want a family? Do I want kids? I can't believe, and the director posted on social media, had both of these books by his side after Carolyn's delegation. And I couldn't believe that this is the kind of thing that he's promoting. And these books are still available to this day in elementary school.
Well, I think it's childish and abusive what's gone on. Childish that he would have those books sitting beside him, but I have certain feelings about the director. I do think that the behavior is sometimes very childish, but a lot of people who teach in the system are very childish. They are in a bubble. They don't realize how the outside world views them, nor do they care. But yes, it's abusive not to tell parents. I know the world has changed, but I mean, I lived in the closet for 20 years. I had a feeling I was different when I was in my teens. I wasn't super about it. I wrestled with it, but can you imagine? I never went to a teacher to get advice. I would never imagine that a teacher would be able to help me. And what gives the teachers, and I don't think it's necessarily all teachers. I think there are, a certain degree of fringe woke teachers. And I mean, don't get me started on that. Some of the teachers who are coming into the system now, the way they look unprofessional. We won't talk about Busty Lemieux from Halton District School Board, but some of the ones coming in with the baseball caps on backwards and nose rings and and purple hair and tattoos everywhere and talking about their lives. Like, what are we are turning our school system into a joke. And where do they learn that, David? In OISE. They're going through these very so-called progressive teacher training courses being taught by other people. And like, what happened to academics and professionalism and setting an example?
Yeah, the standard is so low because I believe of this equity and diversity and inclusive, right? Literally anybody just needs to step right over. The standard is on the ground right now. There is no standard to hop over. It's on the ground. Just step over it and get in there. And it's a complete joke what is happening in the schools. So you were saying, right, like you're a lesbian, and I know, this is what I've heard, that a lot of gay people, they fought for their rights. And one of the things that they fought for was to not be associated with children, right? They say, this is our own thing. We're not interested in children. And from what I see, the irony of this is that it's come full circle right now. And I see like the men in drag as well. And they're saying, oh, we're trying to break stereotypes by showing kids that they could be anything. And I find the irony is that they are embracing the stereotypes of people saying they are children, they are abusing children. Can you tell me a little bit about the history? And I don't think that the gays or the lesbians, I mean, there's groups out there who are like gays against for example, who do not want to be associated with this. Tell me from your perspective what you see.
I think there's a huge divide in the LGBT community. The activists would call themselves the queer community, indigenous queer, queer, whatever you want to call them. But I hate the word queer. They use the word queer. They think it's really cool and woke. I struggled a long time, and I don't want my struggle to be undermined by these crazy people who have no idea what it was like 30 years ago to live in the closet and to, be concerned about your career. They have no idea. They have it so easy. So I think what's happened is a huge divide between gays of my generation and others who are younger, who fought for their rights. I didn't fight, but I certainly embraced those rights. I got married, but people who fought for the rights, and we have all our rights. We are able to get married. We are able, I have no issue. I mean, it's just, it's just like that. I think what's happened is that the activist community is looking for a cause to get behind. So what do? They turn to the trans cause. I've been affiliated, either writing or being involved with the Gay Pride Parade for many, many years. And I remember the trans march was a subdued affair. And everybody, it was acceptable. I know trans people who transitioned. And suddenly it's like totally, totally in your face, because the activists need this cause. And this is a cynical point of view, to stay involved, to have jobs, to have a purpose. And the Drag Queen Story Hour, that is shameful, I think, so inappropriate, because what an example one is setting of women. This is the way women look, like this. This is like so unacceptable for the average woman. Just as the Halton District School Board teacher, Kayla Lemieux, is unacceptable, because trans women don't walk around with, size Z breasts and nipples protruding. They don't walk around with, drag is fun, but it's appropriate for adults to enjoy. They're very off color, and it's not a role model for kids. Certainly not. And it's not a positive image of women. I mean, it's stupid to have these drag queen story hours.
Yeah. And the other thing that I find is they're really undermining women. And
yes.
I find, there's policies in the school board and in public where they say they are looking to be inclusive. Now, mm-hmm. I know, because I go out all the time to do activities. I go to the pool, mm-hmm. and I have my kids in school, and I know the policies. But what they say is, we don't want to segregate, mm-hmm. and we want to be inclusive. So I know there's like family change rooms, there's men and women, right? Mm-hmm. But now they go a step further. I don't see too many women rushing to the men's change room, mm-hmm. but they are allowing men to go into the women's change room. Mm-hmm. So at the expense of making one person uncomfortable, which is the mm-hmm. man going mm-hmm. to the women's space, they are finding it acceptable to make all the women uncomfortable mm-hmm. in this, and all the women need to suck it up. And the other problem that I see is, how can you fight for women's rights if you cannot define what a woman is? And
exactly,
I just can't get over the hypocrisy. And there is nothing else that's being done to accommodate. The only thing that's being done to accommodate is by allowing men to go in the women's change room. Like I said, women can also go into the men's, but I certainly don't see that happening.
No. And I think there are a lot of now very activists, trans activists. I could think of one who I've crossed swords with on Twitter, Faye Johnston, who is a biological male, dresses as a woman, apparently identifies as a woman who is getting tremendous amount of money from the federal government, from the Trudeau government, to advocate for trans people, but clearly hates women because of my exchange, clearly hates lesbians based on my exchange, unless you agree with him or her. And I hesitate to call her a her because she is a biological male. But this is what's happening. These people are dominating the conversation, the narrative, and all these spineless politicians and school board bureaucrats and trustees are kowtowing to their screaming and yelling for fear of being branded the evil transphobic word, which I think you are called. You are transphobic, aren't you?
I made it to the club, I guess.
Yeah, well, I have too. Apparently.
Yeah, I honestly, when I see them just brush aside concerns of parents, right? Like I brought real concerns. I've itemized these concerns. And when I emailed them with my concerns, they replied with the open letter in my email. And I said, can you please identify which sections of this open letter addresses my itemized concerns? Because I have questions, and they did not. And I said, can you please let me know who is accountable for this open letter? And they did not tell me. Now, during a meeting, a board meeting, Jiwon, the director, he was saying, we were involved, and it made it seem like, I mean, he said that he was involved in the open letter with the language that he was using. We put this together. And then he said, I'd like to ask all the staff who were involved to stand up. Everybody stood up except for the director. He remained seated, right? So he's not being accountable for his actions, and he's not being transparent. And I still don't know which staff, because they weren't naming themselves. It's just everybody stand up in a low quality meeting. And I don't think people know who these people are. And it's very concerning that this is the direction that they've decided to head in. And of course, in the open letter, pretty much made it clear. And that book that I read, by the way, had nothing to do with the community, the LGBTQ community. It was about
just obscene,
just a dad abusing his daughters. And they just pulled things out of thin air. This is the board doesn't need reality to make decisions. The board will act on things just because they feel like it. And so they pulled this thing out of thin air, and they said that, I'm trying to undermine these groups. And I was like, first of all, I've never mentioned anything. And second of all, you are the ones hiding behind marginalized groups. Why will you not take accountability for your actions? And of course, there's no way that they're going to be doing that.
So as you found out, they use the human rights legislation, they use marginalized groups, they use kids. These opportunists use whomever they can to push their ideology, to push down your comments, to silence debate. And I mean, good for you. This has got to stop. Parents have to be vocal and speak out and challenge them. I do think at some point they get embarrassed and they don't like the pushback. And I think the tipping point hasn't come yet, but what you did was a really good start. I mean, and their reaction was predictable. It's like, David asked all these questions, but we're going to divert the conversation over here. Let's look at this shiny object. Forget about what David asked. David is a transphobe. David is this. David doesn't, he doesn't understand, all the sort of typical phrases that they've used over the years, and which have ramped up considerably because their ideology has started to be challenged.
They are very, very much stuck in their way of thinking.
Mm-hmm.
Like I said, even when there's nothing going on, they still claim that something is going on, right?
Yeah.
Which to me, I found that open letter just the perfect response. I was happy when they released it because they had documents that I criticized that I encourage all the parents to go and read. I want them to see that they are being left out of the conversation. It's written down. I want them to see that men can access the women's washroom. I want them to see all of this. I want them to see how they treat parents. I want them to see that they are not accountable, that it's an anonymous letter. You know, if it's like they put everything and they're like, this is who we are. And I was like, thanks for letting me know.
Well, you know, it's ironic, isn't it, that the other day was Pink Shirt Day. I don't know if it was yesterday or the day before. It was Pink Shirt Day. Okay, so all these stupid woke people are wearing their pink shirts, but they're the biggest bullies going. Yeah. They bullied you. They tried to bully you. And when you ask questions, they were cowards. They wouldn't own up to what they did, to the fallout. So they're typical bullies.
I want to show you something. So it backfired on the Waterloo District School Board. Now, they are kind of getting a reputation for silencing people online. And they posted this Pink Shirt Day on Instagram. And I know I'm blocked on Instagram. I can't put any comments on their posts, right? So they did this Pink Shirt Day, and check out this comment. And all the comments were like this. Not many comments because they're removing people, right? Just to get that echo chamber going. They said, ridiculous. Yeah. No one stands for bullying, except maybe the school boards who do little to nothing to actually mitigate the problem. Aside from wearing pink shirt once a year, of course, way to go, guys. And then another person said, no, thank you. We don't participate. I think the bullying is happening with the teachers and the school board, not the children. And then another one says, but when the kids try to handle bullying themselves, you blame the victims instead of the bullies. Yeah. You know, it's people are seeing through this. Yeah. And they're getting the backlash. And even our Minister of Education, actually, he posted something I saw right before I talk on Twitter about Pink Shirt Day. And he got ratioed pretty hard with the comments.
Yeah. Good. Good.
People are seeing right through this.
Yeah, and it's all I would say is about time, because it's been going on and really ramped up over the pandemic, but it's been going on for years. And, you know, now the faces have changed, but their MO has not changed. As I said, it's much more dangerous now because these kids are being indoctrinated. Just ridiculous, evil stuff. You know, and you've got to have pronouns, and let's start the day. And you mentioned, Johnny, what are your pronouns? And Susie, what are your pronouns? And then, oh, by the way, Susie and Johnny in the next classroom are told that if they're white, they're the oppressors, and the black kids who are sitting around them are oppressed. And the poor kids are thinking, oh my God, all I want to do is, go out and play in the schoolyard and do whatever you do now in the school, or jump on the jungle gym or whatever. And by the way, the stuff that they're using to indoctrinate, the pronouns and the critical race theory, I think it's far too sophisticated for a kid of, well, even your youngest daughter's age. I know kids have changed, they mature more rapidly now, but I think it's far too sophisticated for 6, 7, 8, 9-year-olds. They just want to be kids. Let them be kids.
I completely agree. And I think it's clear to me the school board has lost the direction, both academically and what it means to be a child, and what the role of the parent is as well in relationship to the school board and the child. Now, the other thing that you have a very interesting perspective is you work in the media, and the media is pretty divided. Like, I actually go out of my way personally to avoid mainstream media because it's such propaganda. And And when I see it, I know it, right? Because I grew up in that.
Mm-hmm.
And I go out of my way. If it even pops up in like suggestions, I say like, don't suggest this channel anymore, because it's
Mm-hmm.
all the same stuff. I want to hear what is actually going on, not what the same thing all these publications are putting out, like the same story. There's nothing, there's no criticism. They're just patting each other on the back, right? I want to hear what is happening. And you have an interesting perspective, because my thing, even, I guess I'm kind of doing some journalism now, but it does take courage to put something of substance out there, to put the real story out there, and to criticize is what I thought journalists are all about. Like, hey, why aren't you doing this? Hey, you said this and that. You know, from your perspective, working in the media, can you tell me a little bit more about like how the mainstream media is run, and even what you've seen in terms of like the smaller media outlets?
So, okay, I'll start at the end and work back. I think there's been a tremendous rise in independent media for precisely the reason you're saying, which is why I'm with True North, because I'm really excited to see the rise of an independent media source with young journalists, mostly young journalists, who work very, very hard to get the real story. The legacy media is going down. It's losing subscribers. Print media is dying, unfortunately. And it's very sad for me, because I spent 31 years with Postmedia and did my best work, loved my career, and was allowed to say what I wanted to say until the very end, when even that was suppressed. I was suppressed. And I think it's because of the nature of the world out there, and the ownership, the concentration of ownership of media, and owns, for example, like Bell Media owns a lot of stations in Ontario and Canada, and they all want to speak with the same voice. In my book, Underdog, I wrote a lot about, because I was based at City Hall in Toronto for almost 20 years. And I wrote a lot. I wrote about how the press gallery, they were all like a pack, the pack journalism. So everybody would check with everybody else on a particular, what story you're writing. I actually heard it. What angle are you taking? What story are you writing? They checked with everybody else to make sure they were. So it is, you're right. It does happen. And I'd be the lone wolf, or some of my colleagues and I'd be the lone wolf, sort of like a salmon swimming upstream. And I got mocked. I even got mocked back then for deviating from the story of the day. I did very well by it. But the politicians would use that to shut me down, to cancel me on social media. Don't think it's a recent phenomenon. It was going on for a long time. Ryerson Review of Journalism did a survey. It's so funny. Way back in the early 2000s, I think it was 2004 or something like that, which some people have pulled out, where they asked counselors at City Hall who were the best journalists and who were the worst. And of course, I got a very low rating, like I'm some crappy journalist. Like, idiots. It's because I'm not your friend. I'm there to ask you hard questions. All the people who got the high ratings were those who would drink with them, would take the story of the day from them, listen to their BS, So it was happening almost 20 years ago. It's gotten far, far worse because reporters are actually being restricted from covering certain stories and taking certain angles, and you see that. And that's why the independent media is doing so well. Government bailouts have spoiled them, from the Trudeau government, have spoiled a lot of the legacy media. And you're right. You're not getting the true story. I used to sit in City Hall at a meeting with another 2 journalists or 3, and they'd report on X, Y, and Z, and I'd report on something else, which I thought was the real story. And I'd wonder whether we were sitting in the same room. And it's been a gradual degradation of truth and of honest reporting. And it makes me very sad to see the state of journalism today, I have to tell you.
Well, it's very clear that people do want to know the truth, and that the rise of independent media, because it is supported by people, right? People are able to vote with their money. And I'm happy that you're in a place that can speak about the truth. And it seems like the legacy media really did this injustice to themselves, you know, and they've undermined themselves. And I'll be honest, I don't really know what they can possibly do to earn my trust. I mean, I know there's other people and you got to do different things, but for me, like it's gone so far with the mainstream media that it's just really hard to. So even when they put something out, I'm thinking like, what's the spin, right? And yeah, unfortunately, that's the.
Yeah, well, you know, it's funny because I see it in your own local media in Waterloo with the coverage of certain things that are going on at the school board. It's very skewed. And, you know, for example, the chair of the board, the former chair, Scott Piatowski, who has been sued, is being sued by Carolyn Berjowski for defamation, and he has a judicial review against them. They never mention any of that stuff. I'm thinking, like, why does this guy get a free ride? Well, you're in a town, and perhaps the media are afraid of whoever's reporting of retribution or whatever. But that's how these people get away with what they do, because the media kowtow to this nonsense.
100%. Speaking of Scott, when Cindy Watson brought up the motion to talk about how they wanted staff to respond, and they didn't authorize that yet. They just said, like, this is what we're going to do. And then staff went ahead and did it without authorizing it. He was instrumental, and I have this video up on my YouTube channel called Our Trustees Abusing Power. He was instrumental in undermining the integrity of Cindy Watson and the integrity of the board in getting them to vote to not talk about something, to violate. Now they have some rules. It's called Robert's Rule. Yeah. And they ended up violating their own rules in order to stop the conversation. And this was, Cindy got it to be a vote that was written down, so everybody knows going forward. And I found that even with this, they make up scenarios and then they act on it. And I couldn't believe that everybody was just acting on it. And it was interesting to see, because I don't have that much experience watching the school boards. But now that I'm in it, it was interesting to see how Scott kind of manipulates and brings things up. Yeah, that was something that caught me by surprise. But it seems to me like the board has no problem taking decisions on things that don't exist, and there's no accountability for them going forward as well. Like, I don't know if there's some ethics or code of conduct training that you go through if you violate these kind of terms. Apparently not for them. I don't know.
Well, interestingly enough, Scott behaved so badly with Carolyn Podorski. I mean, just absolutely tried to ruin her integrity. And for no reason other than she spoke up about something that he disagreed with. And then when she was silenced, then he went on the air and proceeded to defame her, or I believe defamed her. And there's no pushback for him. Well, she sued him, so thank goodness for that, because I have strong views about that sort of behavior. He acted abusively and arrogantly. And then poor Mike Ramsey, Black trustee, gets subjected to a code of conduct complaint, gets pulled from the board, and there is no pushback for Scott. There's no code of conduct complaint. I mean, he violated the code of conduct, but that's the way things work. They have, the rest of the trustees, the ones who speak up are few and far between. There's 3 on the Waterloo board. And then the others are just like little woke lapdogs who just follow, the party line. And you think, and this is, again, it's used as a stepping stone to other things, or, you have a socialist free-for-all, but none of them follow the rules. Very few of them.
That's become very apparent in my limited exposure to the trustees. I couldn't believe it. Like, sometimes I hear these things online and I read stories and it's like, this can't be happening, right? And sure enough, this stuff is happening in our school board, and I have to see with my eyes to believe. And that's why I started my YouTube channel, Beyond the Rift, so people can see for themselves. I think people are smart enough to determine what is true, but they need to see it, right? Just like I saw it. Yeah. And Carolyn's delegation was instrumental in waking me up. And when I saw, and I was like, wait, what is happening? These books are in elementary school. You telling me that you're advocating and trivializing the sterilization of minors? This is just so crazy, right? And then the more I found out, then I find out about the surveys, and they're asking about sexuality, and then all of this stuff. And they have days like Bisexual Visibility Day at school. That to me is just so inappropriate, and this is on the school board's social media, just across the board, right? You're reaching kids, even in kindergarten. Like, who wants to know if my daughter is bisexual? It's crazy.
Let me tell you, I don't know how they have time for teaching with all these special activities, the special days, and all these special events. I don't know when they have time to actually teach the kids, which is why they're probably illiterate.
Yep, that seems to be the case. Well, Sue-Ann, I'm wondering, before I let you go, is there anything that you wanted to say that you feel I didn't cover, or a question that I didn't ask you that you think is important?
You covered the board across the board very well, but I would just reiterate that parents really need to get involved and to pay attention and to watch meetings, or to follow you, to read what's on the agenda. It doesn't take long. I know, everybody's busy, but, maybe instead of whatever, while you're at the hockey arena, for example, go on your phone while you're waiting for your kid to play hockey. Go on your phone and look up the next agenda for the next meeting and start to pay attention, because not you, but others don't really know what's going on in the system. And there's not enough eyes on these people.
That's right. And from what I've noticed, a lot of parents are beginning to wake up to this. And we're getting more and more parents coming out to these meetings and the delegations. Have you noticed the same thing in terms of the coverage that you've been doing?
Yeah. The only problem is it's not consistent. So people will come and scream and yell about a particular issue like they did at the Halton board last week. And then you don't see these people again. So I think people they know that, if they just keep their heads down, the school board bureaucrats, it'll go away. The storm will subside. But you got to have a consistency.
Well said. Sue-Ann, thank you so much for joining me today.
You're welcome.
It was an absolute pleasure. Keep doing the great work that you're doing. And
thank you.
It's so good to get your insight and from all the experience that you have on this. If people want to keep up with you, where can they find more information that you're putting out? Where can they reach you?
So, David, I am on tnc.news. That's tnc.news. That's the website. They could also find me on Twitter, Sue-Ann Levy. Just join my Twitter feed and direct message me if you have any story ideas. If you know, I can help you right the wrongs. But that's the best place to find me, through tnc.news or on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram.
Wonderful. So I'm going to be linking all of these sites and social medias in the description, so everybody can link and get you over there.
Terrific.
You. And for all the listeners and viewers, if you've made it this far, I just wanted to thank you for that. I hope that you found this very informative. And I have a few other podcast episodes covering the policies, procedures, and practices of the school board. I have delegations as well, and a couple other interesting podcasts that gives insight into the trustees and the unions and how they leverage the power to bring this kind of nonsense in. Once again, thank you, everybody. And Sue Ann, thank you again. And until next time, see you guys.